comes to investing in residential real estate, many of us are going to ask ourselves whether we should start with a vacation rental or a traditional rental property. In this video, I'm going to go over what I've found to be the pros and cons of each in order to help you guys make a decision, as well as let you know what I ultimately went with and why. On one end of the spectrum, you have vacation or short-term rentals. An example of a short-term rental would be a cabin you could rent for a few days while going on a weekend skiing trip. These properties are usually going to be fully furnished, and you could expect them to be equipped with much of the same stuff you'd find in a hotel room. Rentals like this are often advertised on platforms like AirBnb or VRBO. On the other hand, you have traditional or long-term rentals. These properties are rented out to an individual or a group of people for a longer time frame, usually to be used as their primary residence. These tenants are usually going to be on a lease ranging anywhere from 6 months up to a year or two. There's going to be an agreed upon amount to be paid monthly, and that amount's usually not going to be subject to change until that lease period is up for renewal. Now that we've covered the basics, let's first get into the pros of each model. Here are some of the pros of a vacation rental. First, you'll have a higher earning potential. Second, you're going to have the ability to use it. And third, there's going to be less concern about the financial stability of your guests. Pro number one, if a vacation rental is done right, the month-to-month profits you could expect to see are usually going to greatly outweigh that which you'd see with a traditional rental property. I've heard this kind of ideology of starting with vacation rentals for this reason, as a lot of people claim it can help you increase your income faster, therefore kind of allowing you to grow your portfolio faster by having more qualifying income. Pro number two, unlike a traditional rental, if you own an Airbnb property and you're somebody who frequently travels to that area, you can actually block off those dates and use it for yourself as your own vacation home, which is obviously pretty awesome. I don't own any vacation rentals yet, but if you ask me, having a profitable business that also doubles as a vacation home you can stay in whenever you want, that sounds like a win-win to me. Third pro? Also, aside from the scenario that a guest could be reckless and damage your vacation rental, you don't need to concern yourselves with the financial stability of your guests for these investments. Since they're staying there for a short period of time, and many of the booking platforms like Airbnb will actually collect the payment from them prior to them even showing up, you don't have to be concerned with them losing their job or their ability to pay long term. Your guests could be a group of unemployed college kids, and as long as they respect the property and have found a way to pay for the booking, their financial stability isn't going to be your concern. Now for the pros of a traditional rental property. First, there's less management. Second, you're going to have more predictable income. And third, the fact that it's an essential service. Pro number one, the management for a traditional rental property is pretty straightforward. Other than basic appliances, your tenant's going to be responsible to furnish the place with their own stuff. If you screen them properly, there shouldn't be a lot for you to do with these tenants other than the occasional mechanical maintenance of the property. Pro number two, your income should be much more predictable with a long-term rental. You can expect them to pay the same amount of rent each month by a set day. The only fluctuation would be if your tenant fails to pay, and that risk can usually be mitigated by, vetting your tenant properly. Pro number three, a place to live is one of the most basic needs we have as Homo sapiens. So it's reasonable to expect that making rent is going to be high on everybody's priority list. As long as your rental is in a solid area with sufficient renters, you're going to know that the service you're offering is always going to be in demand. Now that I've covered the pros, let's get into the cons of each method, starting with vacation rentals. First, more complicated management and needs to be furnished. Second, it's going to be less predictable income. Third will be the risk of changing laws and regulations. Con number one, the management of a vacation rental is a lot more complex and has a significant amount of moving parts. Outsourcing management for these investments is usually pretty expensive, and if you manage it yourself, there's going to be a lot of correspondence between you and your guests. The house will also need to be furnished, and preferably with some well-coordinated interior design. Because you're essentially running a hotel, after each guest, the property is going to need to be cleaned and restocked with basic materials which the next guests will expect. Depending on the season, time of week, and holidays, your prices are going to constantly need to be reevaluated to make sure you're not charging too much or too little for that given time. Con number two, Unlike a traditional rental, the amount of revenue you're going to be receiving is going to fluctuate month by month and year by year. Your rental may also be more affected by economic downturns than a traditional rental would. When money's tight, people can choose whether or not to go on vacation, while having a place to stay is something that everybody needs. Con number 3. Lastly, there's the risk of changing laws and regulations when it comes to vacation rentals. In some areas, they've been banned altogether, and in others, locals are petitioning to get them banned or limited. It's going to be extremely important for you guys to educate yourselves on the local laws and regulations of an area before picking a market to buy a vacation rental. Now for the cons of a traditional rental. First, there's a lower margin for profit. Second, inability to use the property. And lastly, risk of problem tenants. Con number 1. The month-to-month income produced by a high-performing traditional rental is usually always going to be lower than that of a high-performing vacation rental. Con number 2. Unlike a vacation rental, you typically won't be able to use your traditional rental. Your tenants are going to be using the property as their home, and unless you decide to move to that market once their lease is up, it's going to act as solely an investment. And con number 3. Even if you've done a thorough tenant screening, there's still always the risk of a problem tenant that could fail to pay the rent, resulting in a lengthy and expensive eviction process. That tenant could also treat the property poorly and cause costly damages. Although the risk of damages can apply to both short-term and long-term rentals, the platforms like Airbnb typically have guest ratings and reviews, so you can do a pretty good job of vetting their previous stays before you allow them to stay in your property. Due to a lot of hard work and planning, I had the privilege of closing on my first investment property last month. There's a video about that. If you guys haven't already seen it, definitely go watch that one. For me personally, after I weighed the pros and cons of each model, I ultimately decided to buy a traditional rental property for my first purchase. Due to a lot of the economic uncertainty and record high inflation we're experiencing right now, I just felt like, with the threat of a possible recession, it maybe wasn't the best time to bet on a strong vacation and travel market. Regardless of the risks and rewards of each of these models, I think both of them can definitely perform beautifully when they're done right. I personally plan on owning both types of investment properties at some point and think a well-balanced portfolio could do really great to have both. I heard an analogy I liked about comparing your real estate portfolio to a sports team. Each property has its own position. Some are more aggressive, some are more defensive and safe, but the best teams are going to have a well-rounded combination of both offensive and defensive positions in order to, cover themselves no matter what happens. I don't know if I explained that right, but it goes something like that. You guys get the idea. I want to thank you guys all for taking the time to watch the video. I really hope you guys got something from it. Hit the like button and leave a comment if you guys enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel if you guys want to continue to learn more about real estate investing and just my journey and what I'm learning as I go forward. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you guys have the most fruitful day you could ever possibly conceive having within realistic expectations.